The bus's weary brakes screamed to a stop, signaling its arrival at the intersection of Magnolia Avenue and Hill Street. As the bus jolted forward, Keisha stepped on board, weaving through a sea of passengers as the driver called out the stops. In a rhythmic monotone, she clutched her backpack tightly, its fabric frayed at the edges, the zipper hanging on for dear life. She had been exhausted from a long day at Jefferson Middle School, but her eyes still had a glimmer of kindness and curiosity. Every seat was occupied, but no one moved to offer her a seat. Keisha noticed an elderly woman near the middle of the aisle, leaning on a cane for support and with her silver hair neatly tucked under a floral scarf. She was wearing a faded but tidy dress, and she swayed slightly with each lurch of the car, her knuckles white as she gripped the overhead rail. When Keisha saw the elderly woman straining, she decided to stand and point towards the seat, saying, "Here, ma'am, you can take this." The woman turned, her eyes softening into a thankful grin. Keisha hesitated for a moment, staring at the empty space her weary legs wanted to claim. With a slight sigh of relief, she eased herself down and murmured, "Thank you, young lady. You're very kind. It's no problem." As the bus rattled down the road, Keisha responded, gripping the pole. The woman looked at her for a time, focusing on her worn-out shoes and the way she held onto her bag. As though it held something much more valuable than school books, she inquired softly, "What's your name, sweetheart?" Keisha spoke in a clean, light voice. "And you, Miss Evelyn, it's lovely to meet you, Keisha," the woman said. Keisha shrugged, a little smile hinting at her face. "Not many young people would give up their seat like you did. My mother feels it's the right thing to do." Miss Evelyn laughed quietly. "You were raised well." The bus slowed down again as it got closer to the next stop. With more passengers crammed into the little area, Keisha tightened her hold on the pole as it swayed, but she seemed unaffected by the warmth of Miss Evelyn's presence. "It's almost like lounging by a fire on a cold night. Do you frequently travel by bus?" Miss Evelyn inquired after a brief pause. "I live a short distance from Oakmont Avenue Jefferson Middle School." So I imagine Miss Evelyn's eyes glowed with recognition when Keisha nodded. "Every day after school." "How do you know? My granddaughter went there years ago. It's a fine school," Keisha remarked, a little taken aback. Miss Evelyn's voice grew softer. "She shared your desire to become a doctor." Keisha blinked. "How do you know?" "I can tell by the way you carry yourself that you have that flame, my darling. That doesn't burn out easily." Because Miss Evelyn grinned knowingly. Before she could react, the bus jerked to a stop once again, and a few passengers shuffled off, allowing Keisha a little more space to stand as they continued to ride. Miss Evelyn looked at Keisha's bag as she moved in her chair. "You seem to have a lot on your plate," she added in a low but insightful voice. "Big aspirations require effort, don't they?" Keisha paused, unsure of why this stranger's words had such an impact, but eventually she acknowledged that they did. Keisha looked down at her bag and instinctively hugged it closer, not because she didn't want to talk to Miss Evelyn, but rather because her dreams frequently felt like a delicate flame that could be extinguished by reality. Nevertheless, something about Miss Evelyn's kind manner made her want to talk. "It's difficult to even consider it sometimes, because my mom works 2 jobs to keep us afloat, and college seems so far away, but I've always wanted to be a doctor," Keisha added, her voice barely audible above the bus's buzz. With her cane resting against her lap, Miss Evelyn nodded slowly. Her eyes were filled with profound understanding rather than sympathy. She claimed that while dreams like that are difficult, the important ones are never. Keisha, who saw that she was grinning a little, "And my mother agrees. She's a clever lady," Miss Evelyn answered, "and you have that fire within you. I can see it. It's the kind that illuminates not only your path but also the paths of others." Keisha gazed out the window at the familiar streets of her neighborhood, which passed by in a blur. "There are moments when I consider giving up," she confessed. "But then I think of my younger brother, who always says he wants to be like me when he grows up, and I don't want to disappoint him." Miss Evelyn put a rather hard touch on Keisha's elbow and said, "You won't," with conviction, "as long as you keep going. You're already setting an example." When the bus jostled once again, Miss Evelyn shifted positions and dug into her large purse, searching through its contents until she took out a little, plain envelope. She murmured, "This is for you." And Keisha looked at the package, unwilling to accept it. "What is it?" "Let's just say it's something that might help you on your journey. Open it when you get home," Miss Evelyn said with a strange smile. "I can't, you can," Keisha said, her fingers closing around the package, which seemed much heavier than it should have. Miss Evelyn cut her off with a hard yet gentle tone, saying, "You'll promise me you'll open it." Miss Evelyn stood leaning on her cane and gave Keisha a final glance. As the bus slowed as it got closer to her stop, Keisha nodded and tucked the envelope into her bag. "All right, I swear, you have a promising future. Don't let anyone dull it, Keisha." As the bus drew away, Keisha gripped her bag tightly because she could sense that whatever was inside that envelope was something significant that could alter everything. She watched as Miss Evelyn made her way to the door, her floral scarf fluttering slightly in the breeze. For a brief moment, the bus felt quieter, as if everyone else had vanished into the background. With the package safely stowed in her backpack, Keisha ran up the stairs to her family's modest townhouse. Long shadows were thrown on the walls by the evening sun, and the smell of her mother's cooking filled the open window. With his typical enthusiasm, Jordan, her younger brother, greeted her at the door and bounced on his toes as though he had been waiting all day for her to return. "What took you so long?" he questioned, tugging at her sleeve. "Just the bus." As she entered, Keisha patted his head and asked how dull school was. Jordan moaned, "But I made a volcano in science, and Mom said, you'll help me finish it." She smiled, but later, "All right." Jordan agreed and hurried to the kitchen to update their mother on his day. Taking a deep breath, Keisha opened the envelope and found a folded piece of stationery and another piece of paper that appeared to be a certificate. She unfolded the letter first, her heart racing as she read the delicate handwritten words. Keisha slipped into her room and quietly closed the door behind her. She took the envelope out of her bag and stared at it for a moment, turning it over in her hands. It was plain, with no markings or address, just sealed with a simple flap. Her name wasn't even on it, but it felt like it had been meant for her. "All along, to Keisha, this scholarship is in honor of my daughter Mariah, who, like you, dreamed of becoming a doctor but was never able to realize her dream. I hope this will help you get closer to everything you deserve. Sometimes in life, we meet people who remind us of what really matters. Today, you reminded me of kindness, resilience, and the beauty of pursuing dreams even when the odds seem stacked against you. Keisha, more people like you are needed in the world. Never lose faith in yourself." Lovingly, when Miss Evelyn Keisha unfurled the second paper, she blinked back tears. A $5,000 scholarship certificate from a foundation named after Miss Evelyn's late daughter. Her fingers shook as she held it, and the weight of the gesture swirled in her mind with feelings of disbelief, gratitude, and hope she hadn't felt in a long time. For a moment, she sat in stunned silence, the letter and certificate spread out in front of her. Then she picked up her phone and looked for Miss Evelyn's name listed at the bottom of the letter, along with her contact details. She had to thank her. No, she had to do something to express how much this meant. But first she had to share this moment with her family. Turning from the stove and drying her hands on a kitchen towel, Keisha rushed into the kitchen with the letter and certificate in her hands. Her mother was a tall woman with weary eyes, but a definite firmness in her stance. "Keisha, why do you seem like you've seen a ghost?" her mother remarked, her expression showing worry. "Mom." She placed the papers on the tiny kitchen table, carefully smoothing them out while her mother leaned in. And Keisha murmured in a quivering voice, "You have to see this." Jordan dropped his volcano project curiosity and was pulled over to peep. As her mother's gaze swept across the letter, Keisha saw her look change from one of astonishment and bewilderment to one of gentler pride and tears. "Who is Miss Evelyn?" "She's an older woman I met on the bus today," and she asked her quietly as she traced the edge of the certificate with her finger. Keisha explained that she gave me her seat number, meaning I gave her my seat and we spoke. And then she handed me this envelope. When she got off, her mom sat down slowly, as if the gravity of the situation was setting in, and she simply gave this to you. Keisha nodded, still barely believing it herself. She claimed that this could be helpful in honor of her daughter, who aspired to become a doctor as well. This might be really beneficial, Jordan gasped as he gazed up at his sister. Does this mean you're going to be a doctor now? Keisha knelt next to him and ruffled his hair. I have a chance, she replied quietly. You deserve this, she continued, and you're going to make her proud. Her mother reached over and grasped Keisha's hand, holding it firmly but warmly. Keisha, as the house fell into its typical calm rhythm that evening, Keisha swallowed the knot in her throat and nodded, saying, I need to call her. She thanked her mother, who grinned and said, You should, but take your time, let yourself feel this first. Taking a deep breath, Keisha dialed the number on the bottom of Miss Evelyn's letter, which seemed almost daunting, but she knew she couldn't let her thanks go unwritten. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice responded calmly and warmly. Keisha was sitting on her bed with her phone in hand. I'm Evelyn. It's Keisha from the bus earlier today, Miss Evelyn. Despite her rushing heart, she spoke steadily. Hello, Keisha. Miss Evelyn's tone brightened as she answered. I wonder if I'll hear from you, because I'm not even sure where to begin. Keisha tightened her hold on the phone, saying, Thank you, but it didn't feel like enough. You don't owe me anything, my love. Witnessing someone like you take the first steps towards their aspiration is enough gratitude. Miss Evelyn said with a quiet laugh. Keisha's chest constricted. I swear I'll make the most of this and do everything in my power to make you proud, which I already am. The days that followed seemed like a dream to Keisha, but Miss Evelyn gently reminded her that this was only the beginning, and that the rest was up to her. Miss Evelyn's generosity went beyond a simple gesture. Keisha and Miss Evelyn exchanged calls and texts over the course of the following week, and it was a lifeline, their relationship strengthening with every chat. What started as a courteous thank you turned into something far more meaningful, like a relationship, friendship, and mentorship on a chilly Saturday morning. Keisha didn't realize she needed to go to Miss Evelyn's house. It was a little but comfortable home on Westfield Street with a front garden that was awash in vibrant flowers. You didn't need to do all of this. Keisha was welcomed by the aroma of freshly made cookies and the tender embrace of a woman who seemed like family. As Keisha gazed at the comfortable living room with its framed pictures and soft knit throws, her eyes widened. They sat at the dining table with a platter of cookies and 2 steaming cups of tea between them. And Miss Evelyn laughed and said, A guest deserves a proper welcome in addition to I've been wanting to hear more about you. Keisha talked about her life, her mother's sacrifices, her younger brother's insatiable curiosity, and her own aspiration to become a pediatrician. Miss Evelyn listened carefully, nodding when appropriate, and her gaze never left Keisha's face. You remind me so much of Mariah, Miss Evelyn said quietly. Her words were a mixture of pride and grief. She was the type of person who thought that people should always be lifted up. Keisha paused before answering. May I ask what happened? To you? Miss Evelyn's eyes briefly dipped to her cup. 5 years ago, Mariah lost her life in a vehicle accident while traveling to volunteer at a free clinic. The quiet strength in Miss Keisha made her heart hurt. The voice of Evelyn, I apologized. She was my light. Miss Evelyn went on. But I've discovered that light never goes out. It simply finds new ways to shine, and I sensed that same brightness in you when we first met. The room became silent as the weight of her words settled between them. With a little shudder, Keisha reached across the table and clasped Miss Evelyn's hand. I won't let you down, she murmured firmly, adding, I'll do everything in my power to make this count. With her eyes sparkling, Miss Evelyn grinned. As the day went on, Miss Evelyn told stories about her life, her hardships, her victories, and the lessons she'd learnt. I know you will, my dear, or I wouldn't have given it to you otherwise. When it came time to depart, Keisha took in what she had learnt and felt as though she was being passed a torch rather than merely instructed. Mariah's favorite book, which Miss Evelyn gave to Keisha from her shelf, stated, I think you'll find some inspiration in it. As she headed home that evening with the book tucked under her arm, Keisha gave her a tight hug and said, Thank you, Miss Evelyn, for everything. Keisha had a strong sense of purpose. Over the coming months, this was about honoring a legacy, one tiny step at a time rather than simply about her, with a fresh feeling of resolve. Keisha poured herself into her studies, in addition to providing financial support. Miss Evelyn was a constant source of encouragement. They spoke frequently, and Miss Evelyn's words served as a compass, helping Keisha get through times of uncertainty and fatigue at school. Her teachers noticed the change as Keisha's focus improved. Her grades rose, and her confidence increased. She also began spending more time in the library reading science and medical journals. It wasn't simple. Her family's difficulties persisted, and she continued to stay up late on certain evenings to assist her younger brother with his schoolwork or preparing dinner while her mother worked the late shift. But now every obstacle felt like a step towards something greater. One afternoon, Keisha made the decision to tell her story to her science teacher, Mr. Bernard. She pulled him aside after class, holding her scholarship certificate, and described how Miss Evelyn's generosity had transformed her life. It's amazing how attentively Mr. Bernard listened. When she was done, he told Keisha, "You're living proof that generosity can make all the difference." His remarks encouraged her to let him know if she needed anything at all, including study materials or recommendations. Keisha started contacting additional mentors in order to create a network of individuals who saw her potential. Every new relationship felt like a brick in the foundation that Miss Evelyn had laid for her. And as Keisha developed, so did the effect of her gesture. Keisha's story went viral in her neighborhood, encouraging others to stand up and help young people with lofty goals. Local groups helped students in need by providing resources and mentorship programs. Even the tiniest gestures of generosity, like giving books, were appreciated. Free tutoring sessions became popular. Now a senior in high school, Keisha started tutoring younger children, who made her think of Jordan at a nearby community center. She told them about her journey, always giving Miss Evelyn credit for lighting the spark that started it all. And the children listened with wide eyes as she urged them to have big dreams no matter what. Keisha had a clear route to medical school by the time she graduated at the top of her class. Mrs. Keisha ascended the stage to give her valedictorian address. Evelyn sat proudly in the front row, her flowery scarf making her stand out from the crowd. She hesitated briefly, looking around the audience until her eyes locked with Miss Evelyn's. Realizing that this moment wasn't just mine, Keisha said in a steady voice, "It belongs to everyone who has ever believed in me, even when I struggled to believe in myself. It belongs to my mom, my little brother, and especially to Miss Evelyn, whose kindness showed me that even the smallest gestures can change a life." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Miss Evelyn didn't clap. Instead, she simply smiled. Her heart, years later, when Dr. Keisha Simmons was standing in her white coat at the opening of her own pediatric clinic as Keisha cut the ribbon in front of her family, friends, and neighborhood, she paid homage to the woman whose legacy had paved her path by naming the clinic after Mariah. Keisha thought back on how far she had come in her education, career, and ability to give back, all of which had begun with a single moment on a packed bus that served as a reminder to her and everyone else listening to her story of the transformational power of kindness, because, in the end, it wasn't just about realizing her dreams. It was also about using them to illuminate the path for others, just as Miss Evelyn had done for her.